What's up, everyone? Emily Kaplan here with ESPN. We're about a week away from the NHL trade deadline. Crazy how it just feels like it sneaks up on you every year. Like you talk about it for so long. It's too early, it's too premature. And then lo and behold, we're like days away. But here we are, and I'm going to use this space to share everything I've been hearing, being on the road, making a ton of phone calls to GMs, scouts, players, and agents. And here's what I'm hearing about what's going on in the Eastern Conference. I feel like it's appropriate to begin with the defending Eastern Conference champion Florida Panthers. They've been playing so well. Like, Paul Maurice has such a demanding style, both physically and mentally, for the players. They've risen to the occasion. Sergei Bobrovsky's having a renaissance thanks to their goaltending excellence department, and they feel like they've got as good a shot at anyone right now. And they have about $6 million in cap space to spend. I called their GM, Bill Zito, recently, and he told me, 2 years ago, and that's when they made that Claude Giroux and Ben Chiarot trade, they felt like it was vital for their franchise to go for it, to win a playoff round. They just needed it. And so that's why they were willing to give up so many first-round picks. Last year, a bit more of the same when we saw how it panned out. But this year, the foundation is set, and they feel like their cupboard is pretty bare from making those massive trades, that they can't afford to give away some of their top prospects. And they also don't have a first-round pick for the next 2 years. That said, I mentioned they have about $6 million in cap space, so he's waiting to see if he can find a bargain out there. What I didn't hear from Zito, but I've heard from other teams, that he's one of those stealth guys on the market that swoops in when you least expect it. And that's why I wasn't surprised to hear that they were one of the teams in on Jake Guentzel. I think that if they are going to add, it would be either at forward or defense, maybe both. I don't think it's discriminatory for them. They're good on goaltending. So just keep an eye on them for an X Factor team. I mentioned Jake Guentzel. Let's just get into the Penguins. Kyle Dubas, give him some credit. He held a press conference recently and kind of just laid out where this team is, that he committed to this core and he wants to win with this core, specifically Sidney Crosby. Notably, he did include Erik Karlsson when he's talking about the core. Of course, it was Dubas who did make that massive trade for Karlsson, and it still feels like Karlsson is coming up to speed and trying to figure out how he fits in with his Penguins team. But the results just haven't been there. And, Dubas has always said, how the team performs will dictate what I do at the trade deadline. And it does feel like, because they've just been struggling to stay afloat, and they are in the mix and they are in the hunt, but it just doesn't feel as promising. They are trending towards being sellers. And Kyle Dubas did not commit to trading Jake Guentzel. However, around the league and just talking to teams, it feels increasingly likely that Jake Guentzel is going to be on the move. He rejected Penguins' contract offer to begin the season. He's been underpaid for so many years. He knows what he could be worth on the open market. And it sounds like he really wants to get out there and show what he's worth. And I think part of him, and I haven't heard this specifically from Jake Guentzel's camp, but he loves playing with Sidney Crosby. He cherishes that, but I think he has something to prove of being able to drive his own line. So I do think Jake Guentzel gets moved. However, what I've heard from other teams is that the asking price is quite high. Ridiculous is the word that one other Eastern Conference executive used to me to describe it. Multiple first-round picks. And that could be a first-round pick and a legitimate top prospect or legitimate young roster player. But that's a lot to give up for a rental player. That said, we don't typically get rental players like Jake Guentzel who have so much proven success in the playoffs. So curious to see where he goes. A ton of teams interested in him. Out west, if you watch my Western Conference video, you'll hear me talk about him potentially with the Oilers or Golden Knights. Maybe some teams in the East. We'll see what happens. The Rangers we know are looking to add 2 players, at least forward-wise, a center and a right wing. This makes a ton of sense. They lost Philip Hedl for the year, as well as Blake Wheeler. You got to replace those positions. There was some reporting out there that they weren't willing to trade their first-round pick because the draft was in the Sphere in Vegas this year. James Dolan, the owner of the Rangers, owns the Sphere, and he wanted the opportunity to make a splash and announce his first-round pick in that venue. I'm told that's not necessarily true. They would be willing to spend their first-round pick. The players just got to be worth it, and they're scouring a bunch of different options right now, a bunch of different players. However, a team that I do talked to, and they said they called the Rangers and they asked, okay, if you were to execute a trade, would you be willing to give up Gabe Perreault, your first round pick last year, or Brennan Othmann, who's of the Hartford Wolfpack? Those are believed to be the Rangers' top 2 prospects. The Rangers shut that down. So willing to give up the first round pick just for the right guys, looking for 2 forwards, not willing to give up their top 2 prospects. All right, the Detroit Red Wings. The last time I did one of these videos, I said David Perron was the X factor here because we've known in the past, Steve Yzerman has said, we're patient with the rebuild. We're patient with the rebuild. And last year, even though the team was right on that playoff bubble around this time, he traded away a bunch of guys, including Tyler Bertuzzi. This year, I heard that David Perron's name was out there, although my reporting suggests recently that I don't think that's going to be the case. And in fact, I think that David Perron and his camp have engaged with Yzerman over contract extension talks, and that could either be signed right around the trade deadline or maybe they re-engage over the summer. Also, Patrick Kane, how damn good has he been for the Detroit Red Wings coming off that hip resurfacing surgery? There is mutual appetite, it sounds like, for an extension there. Not sure when it gets done, but just keep that in mind because remember, he only signed that 1-year deal. I don't know if they're going to add, but it doesn't seem like they're going to have wholesale subtractions. Although one other team did tell me that Steve Yzerman was willing to listen in on some of his defensemen. So just something to keep in mind there. But Detroit's had an amazing, incredible first half of the season. And it does feel like they are poised to make that playoff push, to break that drought and reward the fans in Hockey Town. So that's just great news for everyone in hockey. I just feel like it's more interesting when the original 6 teams are relevant like that. Lightning, interesting X factor. If you know anything about Julien Brisebois, their GM, he always has tricks up his sleeve. I called him last week and I knew better. I wasn't going to get any specific intel. He likes to play coy, but the biggest loss they have right now is Mikhail Sergachev is done for the year. I caught up with Sergachev when I was in when Tampa Bay last week. I just absolutely love him as a player, but also a person. Like, he's a really good dude that gets down a big level, and it's just crushing. He broke 2 bones in his leg. They're just coming back after missing time. He's doing the rehab process now. Doctors have told him if the Lightning go on a very long run, there's a chance he can return in the playoffs, and he's going to aim for that, but it's going to be a loss for a while because he's their do-everything defenseman, and they're just thin in the blue line. So Julien Brisebois told me that their approach didn't change with the Sergachev injury. They were always looking to add and make their team better. However, now that they have his cap hit to spend, it frees them up a bit because they don't have to use a third-party broker and they don't have to eat some salary. A lot of people want to link them to Noah Hanifin. That's a potential fit for sure. But just keep an eye on them with some defensemen. And I've also heard they're looking at forwards too. Hard to predict what Julien Brisebois is going to do, but I just feel like he always surprises. I'm also curious how he feels about his team long-term, right? Like, that's why he didn't sign Steven Stamkos or engage in meaningful contract extension talks with his captain before the season. They've tabled all of that until the summer, kind of seeing what direction the team's going to go in. Feels like things are just harder for them this year. You know, they've only have 8 players remaining from 2 seasons ago. Like, the last time I felt like they were truly a cup contender and a threat. They're working in so many guys from the AHL, so many of their European free agents, trying to see what they have in the system. So just curious what direction they feel like they're in right now, if they need a reset or if they're able to keep things going. The Washington Capitals, I called their GM Brian McClellan. It was a couple weeks ago now, and it seemed like a guy, he's interesting though. He told me that he felt like he was in such a similar position that his counterpart with the Penguins, Kyle Dubas, was in. And of course, the Caps and Pens have been massive rivals over the last decade. He's like, I'm trying to do right by my legacy players. We know the Caps' #1 focus right now is getting Alex Ovechkin this goal record. However, he's still trying to get competitive and get younger and stay competitive rather. And it's been challenging. It really hasn't been an easy year for them. They've had so many key injuries, and especially to those legacy guys, right? Nicholas Backstrom is gone. Evgeny Kuznetsov in the program. That's their #1 and #2 centers, and their center depth has been tested in a major way. Called up a lot of guys from Hershey and they've thrived. Another loss recently is TJ Oshie. I was there at that game in Tampa when he went down. It was just pretty excruciating to see him, not sure the long-term impact there, but it does feel like he's going to be out a while. So maybe this is the year that they just don't feel like they have it, even though they have been on a big push lately, and they've been listening to offers on Nick Dowd, a guy that has still some years remaining on his contract, is a bottom line guy, let's be honest. He's really a 4th liner, but plays the right way. He's kind of a coach's dream, kills penalties. And because of that, the Caps had a high asking price, and I'm not sure any teams are going to meet it, but he's someone that's kind of been in the mix. Joel Edmondson is a player that I do know other teams are interested in. There's big defenseman thirst around the league. But Anthony Mantha really had a resurgence this year. And he's a player that I think is gaining some traction as we come down the stretch here. Edmonton Oilers, just keep an eye on them because their GM Ken Holland drafted Mantha back when they were both in Detroit. So there's shared history, and Mantha has turned things around this season. And then the Flyers. The Flyers are such a funny team because they are in the mix for the playoffs. As I record this, they're in that third spot in the Metropolitan Division. They've exceeded all expectations, and yet it feels like management is looking for every excuse to trade this year because they don't think that this team has what it takes to contend and then sustainably contend. Like when you're a new GM, and that's what Danny Briere and his president, Keith Jones, they come in, and Torts is part of that, John Tortorella is part of that decision-making process. You really only get one chance to rebuild and do it right and put your stamp on it, and that chance is usually in year one. So my sense on them is that they're still going for the playoffs. Like, that's everything they tell us, but that's why they've been listening in on offers on so many of their players. Danny Briere told me point blank this past weekend, we are not shopping Scott Laughton. However, we have to make business decisions. And if people call us and there's really insane offers, we cannot refuse that because we have to do what right for the future of this team. They love Scott Laughton. So many other teams around the league would love Scott Laughton, but it is a high asking price. It feels like momentum is trending towards him getting moved. I also wouldn't be shocked though if they just don't love the offers and they're like, you know what? He's ours, we're keeping him, and we're really happy because he represents what it means to be a Flyer and the hard-nosed style that John Tortorella is trying to play. Now, Nick Seeler and Sean Walker, they're interesting, firstly because they're a pairing, and they're often tasked with going up against other teams' top lines, and they've been super successful this year, but they're both unrestricted free agents. Danny Briere told me that he's in contact with both of their agents and are talking about figuring out ways to keep them. He just didn't know if it was possible. And it does feel like it's trending for both of them to be on the move. Most interestingly, is I hear there's some teams that are like, can we get them as a package deal? Because we know that when players get traded at the deadline, it's sometimes an adjustment period when they get to their new team. And how great would it be if a defensive pair could come in together and acclimate together? So I know they were looking for a first round pick for Sean Walker. I'm curious if he goes independently, if they go together. But again, I just get the sense that both of those guys are going to be on the move. And then a team that I just don't think we talk enough about is the Carolina Hurricanes. They have about $7 million in cap space, so they've got a lot of flexibility to go for it this year. They have 13 players who are due for new contracts this year. If you know anything or just pay attention to the way that the Carolina Hurricanes operate, it's different than other teams. They value players and position groups. They have a value on it and they stick to that value and they don't care what the market says. Like, that's their value. And that's why I think they, in conversations with other teams, have been open to talking about some of those players whose contracts are up because they're like, I don't know if we're going to pay them what the market dictates. So I think they've even been chatting about like a Marty Nietzsche, who is a restricted free agent this summer, or a Teuvo Teravainen, who's an unrestricted free agent this summer, being like, if we move one of those players out, how much better could we get if we return? I'm not saying that either of those players are going to be traded, but I'm just telling you how outside the box that the Carolina Hurricanes front office does think. I think they're looking to add in a big way. They've been stunted in the playoffs after so much regular season success over the last few seasons. So keep an eye on them as one of the more aggressive teams. That's all I got for you right now in the Eastern Conference. Wait, I didn't talk about the Devils. I know that's what everyone wants to know. Here's what I can tell you. Tom Fitzgerald is talking about goalies. He was super close to getting Jacob Markstrom. That deal fell through. Jacob Markstrom even thought he was going to stay in New Jersey. That's how close it got when he was on a road trip earlier in the month. But it was an issue of retention and salary, also asking price, how much was going back. Maybe they re-engage. I know New Jersey's also talked to Nashville about Yusei Saros. Those asking prices are so high, and sometimes those big hockey deals are better to get done over the summer. So I'm not sure, as I record this, the Devils have slid recently, and maybe Tom Fitzgerald is like, this might be the year that we do take a step back. We exceeded all expectations last year. Just maybe let's put a pause on it and retool for the future because I love the foundation that I have. They also need defensemen, right? They've had Dougie Hamilton missing. They parted with their two guys last year. They just didn't want to pay them contracts, and it's a young and inexperienced group. So if they do add, look for them in goaltending and in the blue line, but I'm not sure where Tom Fitzgerald's head is at this moment, whether it's going to happen or not. Okay, now I'm really going to end it. That's what I can tell you right now about what's going on in the Eastern Conference. Make sure you check out the video on the Western Conference. You can fill in the blanks there, and stay tuned to this channel leading up to and including on March 8th, where I will fill you in on all the conversations that I have around the league. You just need a place to share it, and it's right here on the ESPN NHL YouTube channel.